All right, hello, my name is Kristen Wolski. I want to welcome you to our first Chair Chats episode on mariachi and Mexican musical genres. And today I'm very excited to introduce our moderator, Dr. Cathy Ragland from the UNT College of Music, where she is an associate professor of ethnomusicology. She will be joined today by Dr. José Torres-Ramons, Erika Sovaranes, and Ramon Ponce Jr. If you have any questions throughout the show, please drop them in the Q&A, which is usually near the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to get to your questions throughout the show. And we'll have a little time at the end as well for discussion. And right now I'll pass the baton over to Dr. Ragland. Dr. Ragland, welcome to First Chair Chats.
Thank you so much. This is I'm so excited to do this. Just to have an opportunity to talk about mariachi, even though this isn't my actual expertise, but I found myself involved with mariachi music over my career. So whether it's something I really chose but it just seemed to pop up in various things that I've been doing over the course of my career, not just in academia, but as a public sector folklorist and presenter in public cultural arts programming. So I just want to, before we dig into things, I want to introduce our panel, and we're still waiting on one of them. Maybe somebody will give me a heads up when he pops in. But today I have actually a former student and a current student here, both of whom are very much scholars of mariachi music, very involved in it as musicians themselves, as participants, as teachers, and we'll get into some issues of mariachi education in particular here. So first I want to introduce my former student and now professor at Hiram College in Ohio, José Torres. He was actually our first PhD graduate student in music with concentration in ethnomusicology, of course. Got his degree in 2020, and we're just so proud of him. I can't tell you. We talk him up to our students and say, look what can happen. So I know he's in his third year teaching there at Hiram, and excuse me, as a visiting professor, visiting assistant professor there. And I know that he's also introduced several new classes there about mariachi music, about Mexican music, Latin American music. So he's really, I think, giving them a lot and really helped enhance the program there. So that's really exciting. And I definitely want to hear some more about that. So maybe he can tell us more about that experience. Also with us is, there's Ramon. Hi. Is Erika Sovaranes, and she is our new this year. She's a new PhD doctoral student, and she's a teaching fellow in our division, and is a teaching fellow for the mariachi. And Jose was also a mariachi, directed our mariachi for a time here at UNT. And this is what Erika's doing now. She's also a graduate of UT RGB, which is University on the border, Texas-Mexican border, where I taught at one time when it had a different name. It was the University of Texas Pan American. And she has done a lot of research on mariachi education, and particularly with focusing on women. And so that's something that both she and Jose share, is also an interest in gender and mariachi. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit later too with both of you all. And so we're very happy to have her with the mariachi, and she's doing some great work with them. And I'm very excited for some of the upcoming events that we've got going on. Yeah. And I'm just so thrilled, I have to say, to introduce our next panelist, Ramon Ponce, and he's wearing his charro suit today, representing the mariachis, and wearing shorts underneath, right? We were joking about the suit and how I said, well, you can just wear whatever you want below because no one's going to see you. So I'm so happy to have him. Ramon and I know each other, have known each other for a very long time. I'd say more than 20 years, Ramon, correct? Yes. And he is part of a family of mariachis. They have been in New York City, really one of the top mariachis in New York City. They've now celebrating 30 years in New York, coming from Puebla, Mexico, which a number of immigrants in New York City are from. Also others from other southern states like Guerrero and Chiapas. And he and I worked together in New York when I was actually working on a PhD, but I was also a public sector worker. I was working at the Center for Traditional Music and Dance as a program director. And we were very interested. I had worked with the Mexican communities and other in Texas and Washington State. And while there, we used to work, the organization worked with a lot of immigrant communities, and they were interested in working with the Mexican community in New York for the first time. And this was back in the late 90s. I had arrived there in 98, so about 99, 2000, I started working on this. And I met Ramon and his father, Ramon Sr., and we worked together to write the first grant to create the Mariachi Academy of New York, which was the very first mariachi program in New York City. And it continues today under Ramon's direction. He has really kept it going. And I hope we'll definitely hear some more about that. So those are our three panelists. And I'm going to first ask everyone to just introduce yourselves. I mean, beyond what I've done just the basic, but introduce yourself and let us know some things about what you're doing and your interests and how you got into this, maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll dig into some questions. So maybe we'll start with Jose.
Good afternoon. My name is José Torres. I am a visiting assistant professor of performing arts, humanities, and cultures at Hiram College. As Dr. Ragland mentioned, I received my PhD from UNT about a year ago, and I've been at Hiram for about 3 years. And I teach courses in ethnomusicology. We don't necessarily have a degree program in ethnomusicology, but the courses that I focus on are obviously the courses that are in musicology, ethnomusicology. And I started in mariachi a long time ago as a high school student in the San Antonio Independent School District, where I was born and raised. And I went through the school system in San Antonio, and I got into mariachi a little bit late for more traditional students of mariachi. I got in like my last year of high school. And I studied with Juan Ortiz, who was, Juan and Bell were really one of the principal people that brought mariachi into the school system in the United States, starting in San Antonio. And they founded the first International Mariachi Conference, bringing Mariachi Vargas de Tecalitlan, who was considered, one of the principal professional mariachi ensembles in the world. And so that particular conference that they started in San Antonio really kind of set up a whole movement of mariachi in education that I think has spread out. I mean, it's existed before them in school systems, but they were really the ones who kind of, I think, really brought a lot of attention. And then people went to that conference and started conferences in other places. And so I was fortunate enough to catch the tail end of that conference. I went to the last conference. And then I was a mariachi instructor for a few years in San Antonio. And I've taught mariachi in other school systems, both in San Antonio and San Angelo and Houston. And let's see, and I'm not as a director, but I've worked with groups in Dallas and Fort Worth when I was studying at Denton. And so I played professionally for many years. I had another life as a director of mariachi ensembles, and then I went into academia, which was, I'm very pleased to say I'm here now, and my research focuses on mariachi performance, particularly the performance of gender. within mariachi and how it intersects with other kind of musical and socio-cultural elements. I was very fortunate to receive a Fulbright Hayes dissertation fellowship and spent a year doing my dissertation field work in Mexico City and Guadalajara before I came back and wrote my dissertation. And now here I am with all of you. So I'm really happy. And I want to also very warmly thank Dr. Ragland, as she said, was one of my professors. And I always speak fondly of her when I talk about the classes and the coursework that I did at UNT. So I'm really happy now to be having her as a colleague and continue our working relationship. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Erika, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing?
Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Erika Sovaranes. As Dr. Ragland said, I am a current doctoral student at UNT. I did get my master's in ethnomusicology from UTRGV, as she stated. And what drew me to UTRGV in the first place was because it has a reputation for having the best collegiate mariachi in the United States. Mm-hmm. So that was my main reason for wanting to study there. My background is actually very similar to José's in that I am a product of Mariachi Education in the school system. I actually originally started as a flute player in elementary school, and I continued playing flute like throughout the rest of my musical career. But in middle school, I started in mariachi, and I was also a product of the mariachi conferences throughout New Mexico, because that's where I'm originally from, is from Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I remember every year always going to the Albuquerque Mariachi Conference, the Las Cruces Mariachi Conference. I went to the Tucson Mariachi Conference once, I believe. And I just remember that those conferences are really what grew my love for mariachi, because they were a lot of students my own age with like the same sort of educational background as me. And we all loved mariachi and we all just got to jam out, which was great. And so I started there, and by the time I was 16, I landed my first professional gig with an all-female group from Santa Fe. Their name was Mariachi Buenaventura. So from the age of 16 on, I've been in all-female mariachi groups. It wasn't until I would gig here and there with other groups if they asked me, but it's mainly been all-female. So I was with Buenaventura for a good 7 or 8 years, and then I moved to the Valley. And when I moved to the Valley, I joined another all-female mariachi group, which is Mariachi Margaritas from Brownsville, Texas. And I was with them for another 6 years. And then while I was with them, I was studying at UTRGV, and I was a member of the mariachi program there. And we got to do so many incredible things. I remember with the university group, we were able to perform a competition in Mississippi. We performed at the Kennedy Center. There was a whole bunch of really great experiences that came out of that. And then on the other side with Margaritas, we had a lot of really great opportunities. We were selected to go on tour with Angela Aguilar, which is the daughter of Pepe Aguilar, a very famous mariachi artist who comes from generations of mariachis. So we've been honored to be able to go on tour with her several times. We've actually accompanied Pepe Aguilar as well. So it's been a whirlwind with these all-female mariachis. And then I moved here to North Texas, and it's the first time that I'm actually gigging with a co-ed group, and it's a very different experience. So I think that's going to add a lot, because I too focus a lot in my studies on gender and mariachi, focusing more on like female identity in mariachi. So I think this is going to be an interesting transition to see how this sort of affects my academic work now that I'm performing, because I'm still performing with Margaritas, but I'm also performing with this co-ed group. So I'm interested to see where that takes me in the future academically.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of big plans too. So
yes.
So I'm really excited that Erika is here, and so we can move this mariachi forward. And I now want to ask for Ramon to say a few things. And I just should say that, you know, speaking of both of these individuals who went through the university, but also came out of the mariachi education programs, local mariachi education programs, which is something that Ramon now has 20 years of experience with this or more. But so it's, and this is considered a new program compared to what we have in the Southwest. So, and in fact, when Ramon and I were talking initially about doing this, he said, you know, I'd love to have a mariachi program. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm from Texas, I'm from San Antonio as well. And I've seen these, and I even worked with one in, when I was in Seattle, Washington. I lived there and I got my master's there. And I was also director of cultural arts program in Seattle as part of Northwest Folklife, and we did a big project with Mexican community, and I worked specifically with a man that I think all of you are familiar with, Mark Fogelquist, who is really the first person to bring mariachi and teach mariachi into the schools, and he was doing that in Washington State, and I worked with him to present his group along with several other musicians to really kind of introduce folks at the big Northwest Folklife Festival. That's a huge festival that happens every year to the music in this community. There were also Texas immigrants playing Tex-Mex music and conjunto, and this is also a tradition that I work with quite a bit. So this idea, when Ramon mentioned it to me, I said, yes, I know Mark Fogelquist is somebody who's out there. We know other people. Ramon also mentioned the leader of Sol de Mexico, José Hernandez, and we started putting our heads together, and we wrote the grant. And so I just wanted to kind of give that little context, but also introduced Ramon and let him pick it up from there and tell us more about what's been going on in New York with his famous mariachi, and also the Academy.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. My name is Ramon Ponce, and I'm director of Mariachi Real de Mexico here in New York City. And this year, as Cathy mentioned, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary. I started the band with my father when I was just 16 years old. I'm the fourth generation of musicians in my family. We all play, you know, this is what we do for a living. But on both sides of my parents, we're all musicians, you know, and I was lucky enough to be born into this. And now my son, who is 6 years old, is also started to sing, and he plays piano, and he's into music. So this is our again, what we do, what we learn through the years and through generations, and it's just wonderful to be able to pass it along and to share it with the community here in New York City. We've been with Mariachi Real de Mexico for the last 30 years, active, and I was very lucky enough to have met Cathy Ragland, Cathy, as we just called her, you know, because we met each other a long time ago when she was working at CTMD. And this idea came about, you know, to do the mariachi program here in New York, because everything was happening down south. Everything was happening in California, Texas, but nothing was really going on here. And so I said, you know, now that the Mexican community is growing, it was growing at the time, you know, this was 20 years ago, or even more, like 22 years old, 22 years ago. Mm-hmm. You know, we said it's something that we have to do, and again, I was lucky enough to meet them and got their support. And I said, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to call the people who know about this. And so I reached out to José Hernandez and Pepe Martinez of Mariachi Vargas de Tecalitlan, who are now very good friends of ours, and also very supportive of the program and everything we do around here. And I also spoke to Nati Cano and Randy Carrillo from Mariachi Cobre. So I went to all these great musicians and great pioneers in mariachi music, and they were, sure enough, very helpful and very supportive. And since then, you know, we've done a lot of things together, and we continue sharing our music and doing the best we can so that we can represent and have the tradition over to the East Coast and not just stay on the West Coast. That was my vision 20 years ago. I said it doesn't have to be just Texas or just California. Why not New York? Why not Chicago? And later on they did. Chicago had this big has this big Mexican and mariachi program, and hopefully other states from the East Coast are going to join in, and the whole mariachi movement can also come to the East Coast. So that's something that we've been going on and we've been doing, and we're very happy to be part of it.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if you want to say a few words, because I think this is kind of what's really important for us. I remember was when we managed to get José Hernandez from Mariachi Sol de Mexico, very well-known group. If any of you have heard the album that what's her name? Now my brain has just forgotten the name. Oh, Linda Ronstadt, excuse me. They accompanied her on an album that she made many years ago, back in the late 80s, but it's still very much a classic, Canciones de mi Padre, and she's singing mariachi. She, of course, was a rock singer, right? But she grew up singing mariachi music and was from a family of musicians in Arizona, I believe it was Arizona or New Mexico, I'm not sure. But in any case, that's where some of you, if you listen to that record, then you heard Mariachi Sol de Mexico. But just really what they did, what they were able to give to the, or what you learned really from them and doing this, because I think that was a really great idea for, to bring somebody like that in and really, share materials and, tell us what they did wrong, and so that we wouldn't have those mistakes.
Again, these are people that have done it for many years before us, and they knew about the program, they knew about how it works and what works best and what doesn't work. And we were lucky enough to have their advice, and then we just changed some things so that it could fit our program here in New York City. And when we got the first grant from National Endowment for the Arts, we decided to start, even though it was a smaller grant. But I remember at the beginning, we only had 40 students, and 30 of them were girls. So we were very happy about it. And it was something that, we were surprised about it, but it also had happened in other programs, where little girls or women were starting to get involved in mariachi music. And now there are, hundreds of mariachi musicians who are very active, women musicians, and it's something that's very nice, and so when I spoke to, again, I spoke to these people, like Pepe Martinez from Vargas and José Hernandez, they said, this is what has happened, and this is what we do, and this is how it works, and then we just took it from there and continued.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned the girls, because that was something that we were really surprised about. And also, by the way, I should mention that when we applied for this grant, it was right before 9/11 happened in New York City, and we had asked for a lot more money, and we didn't get what we thought we would get. And because of what happened and all of a sudden funding, a lot of people just some people didn't get any funding at all. So we were really lucky to get something, because that was just, and it was such a paralyzing event. We just didn't know what to do, but we ended up starting with the small amount of money that we did get. In, I believe it was January, right? Just in the next year. So it's worth noting that in spite of that, we got a little bit of money to get ourselves going. And since then, the organization has gotten other money.
Yes, and I'm very happy to say that we are the only ones who keep it free for the community, and it's been a lot of work, but we're still going on, and we have a lot of students who are very involved, and last year we also got a grant from National Endowment again to keep the program going. So a lot of other foundations have also helped, and we've been very lucky to keep the program free.
Yeah, So I want to dig into the education part and talking about the participation of girls and women, producing women in the field as teachers, as performers. And I think you know, Ramon represents the tradition, how it was in Mexico, that it was handed down, a tradition handed down to male members of the family, right? Very much a patrilineal tradition. And that's pretty much, you know, I think has dominated even Mexico up until very recently. The establishment of these schools, for example, is something that was really not typically done in Mexico. And but it really made sense here because you had people who had come, but you know, other family members stayed behind. There wasn't the opportunity to really pass on traditions in the same way. So these schools were started. Actually, they were started in community centers, as Jose mentioned, in San Antonio, one of the first ones. But now throughout the country, in cultural arts centers and community centers. Ours began in a church, the one in New York. We actually, no, that's not true. We were at the one of the housing complex in Harlem, and they gave us a little space that was kind of rough to work in, but eventually then through a church, one of the neighborhood churches that opened up their doors and gave us the space. But now mariachi is being taught in high schools, in universities. University of Texas has a lecturer in mariachi, actually hired Monica Fogelquist, who is Mark Fogelquist's daughter. So that kind of tradition, even though it's a little different than in Mexico. But I wanted to just get the panel to talk about their, not only their experiences, but their work on mariachi education and interest in mariachi education, and how that has really opened the door for not just people who aren't in families of musicians, but how it's also become very much part of Mexican American communities, Chicano communities, what it represents here in the United States as opposed to what it is in Mexico, and also the fact that education programs are now opening up in Mexico, and that they've embraced this this idea of teaching, this new way of teaching the music, and also the participation of girls, of women in this, because as Erika mentioned, you know, she became part of the program. Ramon mentioned that it is true, we were a little shocked. We started with mostly girls. We didn't have a lot of boys that came in. I think now it's probably about even, right, Ramon? Yes. But at the time we were we were scratching our heads about that. And I think one of the things is that the boys were being pushed into soccer, or at least that's what they were being expected to do. So they weren't really doing the program at that time, but I think that's changed. But just this idea of how mariachi has evolved on both sides of the border, and how both sides of the border are influencing what's going on, that not only was tradition brought here, but what happened in the US as far as teaching it, education programs, the inclusion of girls and women also has opened up this possibility in Mexico too, and how it is very much a transnational tradition, but has a very different sort of place in in the experience of Mexican immigrant and Mexican American lives. So maybe Jose and Erika maybe want to chime in about that.
Yeah,
I'll let Erika go ahead.
So I think the Valley is a good representation of this, because in Santa Fe, mariachi education isn't as prevalent as it is here in Texas, and especially in South Texas. Like UTRGV now has a specialization in mariachi education. You can get a degree in mariachi education now at UTRGV, which is one of the first programs of its kind. And that comes from this direct line of mariachi education starting in like middle schools. There are middle school mariachi groups down in South Texas that rival some of the professional groups here in this area. It's very technically challenging music that they learn. And I think one of the things that often gets overlooked about mariachi education is that it encompasses everything. You're simultaneously a choir director because you have to teach vocals. You're simultaneously an orchestra director because you have to teach strings. You're simultaneously a wind director because you have to teach trumpet, brass, right? And you're teaching guitar, you're teaching culture, you're teaching a different language, and it's also very physical. So I know that there's a lot of mariachi programs that are considered a PE credit down in the Valley because of how physical it can be and how much that they do. So there's so much that goes into teaching mariachi that I don't think people tend to like really separate all of that. After I got my master's at UTRGV, I was hired to start a mariachi program at a high school in Brownsville. Because even though the Valley is known for like mariachi education, Brownsville didn't have any mariachi programs in the district itself. They had a lot of estudiantinas, which is a different sort of like musical ensemble. So they hired me and I had to start it from the ground up. And I think I also, when I started, had a majority of students were female. And I think it was also partially because I was a female and I feel like they could relate to me at a different level. In turn, I also had some male students who then didn't take me as seriously as they would have taken a male teacher. So there's pros and cons to both and learning how to work with both types of students.
Anyone else want to chime in? I'm just opening it up to the panel to talk about that.
Well, I have completed a very complex and diverse journey across both music education and mariachi education. So I view it as a recovering mariachi director, now ethnomusicologist, and have looked at some of the ways in which mariachi is formally taught and informally taught. And I think the issue, from my perspective and from what I see, in the United States, it seems to be a very not a simple approach, but what I mean is when we talk about music education is very much performance-based. So what we call music education is teaching people to perform. And even music education itself criticizes itself in the fact that it's performance as education. And so what does that entail? It entails teaching people to perform, to play music. And are there other ways that music can teach people? Are there other things that music should teach people? Because music education in the United States has also been criticized for being a place of institutional whiteness. And so based on, kind of European cultural aesthetics. And so it's been very exclusionary. It's not necessarily a democratic process sometimes in some places. Texas has been, Texas music education has kind of fallen into that category. And so I think mariachi in Texas has very much, and probably in the other places where they've kind of followed the model in Texas, it's been a way for minorities to enter into music education. And in that sense, I think it's been, that's been the appeal. The appeal is that we're seeing people in music education that we have not had a place in music education before. And because it's connected to Mexico, and because it's such a strong symbol of Mexican culture and Mexican identity, it's all the more so championed. The complexity of it is that when it's formalized and taught within a US music education classroom, there are some things that kind of get lost in the translation. There's some things that get foregrounded and some things that get backgrounded. And I'm actually presenting a paper tomorrow at the Society for Music Theory because I was invited to write a chapter for a volume that's kind of critiquing music theory and its approach to understanding music. And so one of the things that I'm talking about is this idea of Mexico. You know, in the popular culture, Mexico's been equated as dirty, uneducated, poor. And sometimes mariachi within a music classroom, those negative images, those stereotypes of Mexico get translated in a music classroom. And the way they get translated in a music classroom is that mariachis are viewed as uneducated because they don't read music, they're illiterate. They play out of tune, and they play with really harsh tonalities. And all of that is kind of taken out of context, because that out of tuneness, the fact that it's an oral tradition, those are all very cultural elements. And there are tons of music cultures throughout the world that don't follow the Western European system of making music. Mm-hmm. And so by minimizing that, those elements or kind of, they take on almost a racist type of stereotype within a US music education system. So we have a choice. What do? Do we try to make mariachi more like a Western European aesthetic and really kind of emphasize those ideas of notation and performance, and minimize these other things that we think are stereotypes and we think are negative? Mm-hmm. Or do we try to consider those elements for what they are, based within a particular world music tradition, which is partly European, but also partly non-European? And so I think that has been, it's an issue really that a lot of people haven't looked at. And I probably get into a lot of trouble when I bring it up, because a lot of people, myself included, because like, again, I'm not talking about something that I haven't experienced. I was a mariachi teacher for many, many years. I used to teach exactly what my teachers taught to me. There's a phrase, and I use it in the chapter that I'm writing. We want to teach our students to be musicians, not mariachis. And so that's a tautology equating, meaning that mariachis are not musicians, and it's an insult. And so that's the complexity, I think, of mariachi education. But it gets overpowered because, again, mariachi brings in people into music education, into spaces where they've been marginalized. And so since they've been marginalized, it's a very powerful tool, an entryway into this space that has been very privileged before. Mm-hmm. The complexity in it is what gets lost when you have to move into these spaces. What do you have to sacrifice? It's like somebody from, let's say, a hip hop that wants to move into a more mainstream market. You have to sometimes change yourself and adapt yourself to appeal to this broader market. So there's a lot of mariachi educators that want to appeal to the broader music education community and gain legitimacy, which is appropriate. My questions that I'm always asking myself is, where is the balance there, or is there a balance and we just take it within this space? And in Mexico, they're also being very much influenced by what's going on in the United States, because what they see is, oh, they value mariachi more than we do, so we need to be doing what they're doing. Yeah. And it gets into larger ideas of US superiority and Mexican inferiority and that whole tenuous relationship that's happened historically. And so this becomes another space where these ideas kind of get played out. But the only thing I want to say about it is it's just very complex, and it's just messy. And so, because yes, women have been invited into this space, and as they should, and certainly in Mexico, there's still it's still very much a masculine space, even though there's obviously a lot more female participation now. So it's not necessarily like I have an answer for it, but I mean, if you just ask me my opinion, that's what I kind of examine and look at, and from an anthropological perspective, those are the questions that I'm asking. And my experience as a mariachi teacher lends some weight to being able to look at those questions, because I have an experience with having been on this side of really wanting to be, I had a award-winning high school mariachi ensembles, that we'd go to competitions and win first place and celebrate in that. And it was very good. Very good for the students and for everyone. And now having, kind of examined a lot of the things that I looked at in Mexico and now doing a lot of the work that I'm doing right now, I think I'm critically, looking at some things now and trying to ask some questions maybe that I wasn't capable of seeing before because I wasn't, an ethnomusicologist. And so that's what I bring to it. But again, it's not necessarily to disparage or to discourage what's going on. But it's a complex issue,
Yeah.
So that would be my piece of it.
And to build on what he's saying, this complexity, like this two sides of the same coin, like in a lot of the education here, it starts to become a lot about, like he was saying, competitions, especially here in Texas. It's a big thing here in Texas. And so while the mariachi programs are really churning out very high quality musicians, they're learning these very complex versions of songs that they then can't turn around and play in like a regular gig setting, because they'll learn these very complicated and very beautiful arrangements that are written specifically for them. But then it's not like the same version of like Hermoso Cariño or something that you would learn at a gig outside. So when I was teaching, I kind of took the approach of like, I want to teach you guys, yes, hard, complicated music, but at the same time, I'm going to teach you like jamba music, you know what I mean? So you can go out and make a living for yourself outside of this, because where I was teaching at the time was about a mile from the border. So we used to go into like soft lockdowns because of immigration happenings in the area. And a lot of my students would cross the border every weekend to visit family, or some would cross every day. So this was very much a part of their life. And so a lot of them, college afterwards wasn't an option. So I wanted to make sure that what I was teaching them could then also be translated into a way of sustaining themselves financially outside of school. So if they chose to study, they could still support themselves financially through music, and I think that's also kind of mirrored in my personal experiences with mariachi, being both a concert mariachi musician and now like a gigging client-based mariachi musician. Like he was talking about, like, to be a musician and not a mariachi. The mariachis that I'm working with now, like, are extremely talented musicians. Like, I don't know how many necessary classical musicians can do all the repertoire in like all like 6-7 different keys. Like these musicians, these like hardcore gigging musicians, they have like a repertoire of several hundred songs that they know all the words to. They know first, second, third violin part. Some of them know multiple instruments. And then they know them in like several different keys. So like if the client wants to sing, or if they want to sing, or if a girl wants to sing, or if a guy wants to sing, there's so many levels of theoretical like complexity in the music itself that I think gets overlooked a lot when thinking about mariachi music, like mariachi musicianship.
Yeah.
And I think what gets lost in what Erika's saying is it's not lost in what she's saying. What I'm saying to add to that is that in Mexico, music and memory are, intertwined. In other words, a lot of this repertoire of songs are connected to questions of identity, questions of family heritage. There's a lot of kind of collective memory that is situated within these particular songs under música ranchera. There's regional identities. There's repertoires, I should say, that exist in Zacatecas that don't exist in Jalisco, that don't exist in Michoacan. And so what winds up happening, what we're really kind of talking about is, how do we frame musical knowledge? And what value is musical knowledge valued simply by technique and technical performance? Because when we talk about being a virtuosic performer, I would say that a mariachi that maybe doesn't perform in a theater has a different style of a different type of virtuosity that's based on this large catalog of songs that are, while simplistic, you know, compare, if you want to look at it from that perspective, you know, simplistic in their chordal progressions and lyrics, that's not where the value is placed. The value is placed, number one, on the interpretive and interpretation, not just vocally, but instrumentally. And so I think some of these things start creating hierarchies, and those hierarchies are also exist in Western European music and in music education. And so what we wind up doing is recycling a little bit of these hierarchies. And I only brought that up again because as Erika was talking, it made me start thinking about you know, what she was saying, which I think she framed really, really nicely. So I just wanted to just add a little bit, I guess, a little bit of context to that, but I'll turn it over back to Dr. Ragland.
Yeah, I would like to bring Ramon in on this because one of the things that, well, when I think about the grant that we received, one of the things they said to us was, well, most of the grants, and this is at that time, things have changed since then, but most of the grants we've received about mariachi programs have come from people that are not from the tradition, and they're like school teachers or whatever, and they were really drawn by the fact that we had very much community buy-in with our project, with our program, and that we were working with someone like Ramon. And I think the way to kind of really try to make some changes is find ways in which I think education programs or educators can work with people like Ramon here and his you know, school that he's doing, which is really just community based. And I want to say that, you know, when in writing grants for something like this, doing projects with mariachis, you always have to satisfy the people are reading it. And I would always sort of talk about how mariachi education has a positive impact on student academic achievement, academic attainment, student engagement. However, you know, when we actually, Ramon and I talked to the community and why are you interested in having this? They had completely different interests, and they were really around social and cultural impacts, like connecting the culture of their parents, you know, to the kids. They wanted the kids to really know more about Mexico and know more about this tradition. They wanted to have, they were really looking for a sense of pride and identity in this music because the students were, you know, these kids were really living in mixed communities and oftentimes disparaged for their identity, and was a way to really kind of build that up, to really have them work together as communities and groups, and also maintaining the Spanish language was really important. So I want to turn it over to Ramon and just have him talk about this a little bit.
Yes, I've actually seen it firsthand. You know, my father comes from the old school mariachi. You know, he's 80 years old and he's been playing mariachi music for 60 years. He's been playing trumpet for 60 years. So I've seen it, and not only him, but also many other musicians who have joined our band for the last 30 years. So they tell me, and the way they used to learn music, you know, as they mentioned before, it was through somebody else, either, you know, your father or your uncle. Somebody taught you the music, and you do it by ear. But then my father also came from, he was, before doing mariachi, he was playing in the orchestra, so he already knew how to read music, and so when he wanted to join the band, at least when he was 20 years old, he said, "Where's the music?" You know, like, because that's what he's used to, and they said, "No, you know, here in mariachi we just do it by ear. You know, just listen to Javier Solis or Jose Alfredo Jimenez, and you play the songs." And he was very shocked because that was something that he never heard of. And this was back in, you know, like almost 65 years ago, you know. And then I see the other side of the coin, you know, when I come to New York City, and I was very lucky enough to be accepted into LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, and then go on to college and do my fine arts and study music, and then apply that to mariachi music, you know. So it makes a big difference being able to be a musician first, and then to do mariachi. But it's also very important, and I've seen it, to keep the tradition, to keep the real feel of mariachi music, which sometimes gets lost when they focus more on being good musicians. You know, if they play great violin or great trumpet, sometimes they forget about the true tradition or the true feel of mariachi. And that's something very, very important that my father always talks about. And right now we have, as our first violinist, we have Mario Trujillo. He used to work with Mariachi Cobre for many years, 17 years. And again, he was also from a very low-class family, and he was lucky enough to study classical violin. But then he joined Mariachi Cobre, and he has all these great mariachi style and mariachi school. But we talk about the same thing. You always have to keep it real. You always have to keep the tradition going, and you have to do even though you're a good violinist or a good trumpeter or a good musician, you have to stick to the roots and really feel the music, because that's what the tradition is about. It comes from from the farm. It comes from the people, and we have to keep it that way. And that's exactly why we've been lucky enough to be 30 years around, because every time we perform with the band, even though we have great musicians and we know our ABCs of music, we still go back and keep it, like you said, play Hermoso Cariño, all these great Mexican songs, the way they used to be done, and the way they meant to be. And that's something that's very important in mariachi education. Whenever we teach our kids how to play the instrument, of course, we're teaching them to be good musicians because they can later on be anything they want or play anything they want. One of our students who used to start, he started with us guitar. He's now doing classical guitar at Manhattan School of Music, and he started from zero. We taught him how to play guitar, and so we teach them how to play the instrument, but we're also teaching a tradition. We're also teaching a genre, which is very important, and it has a special way of doing it, and a special way of keeping it. So that's also another element that has to be kept in mind, because if you only create good musicians, they're going to sound like a little orchestra, and we're not a little orchestra. We're a mariachi band. So it's completely different when you keep the tradition going with great musicianship.
Well, and then there's a certain amount of style and things you learn from experience too. The longer you spend in mariachi, the more you learn. And you could even learn like the same song, like La Bikina. There's like 4 different versions. Exactly. And like the most talented mariachis will be like, the client will ask, well, which version do you want? Do you want the Luis Miguel version? Do you want the Vargas version? Like which version do you want of this? And they'll just be able to like put it out there. But if you're teaching a student, if you teach them 4 different versions of the same song, they're gonna get bored super fast, right? So there's a lot of stuff that comes with experience. And I think there's a lot of, in reference to the style, that's something that I always try to tell as many musicians as I can, that mariachi is a style. Just like jazz is a style, just like classical musicianship is a style. I think there's a stigma around it that it's bad technique, or that it's bad this and it's bad that, like vocally it's bad for your voice, and it's not. It's a style that takes a long time to learn, and a lot of it comes from listening. One of the things that I tell my students is to go to listen to the songs, listen to these artists that you love, to find that vocal style or that trumpet vibrato or like the style that you want. And the biggest thing it comes from is listening to the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really the important thing, is listening to it and really trying to understand it as it's performed. We're really close to the end, and I wanted to we need another hour for this, and I wanted to open things up for questions. I don't know if we can go over a little bit, but there was one question that the library really wanted to me to put out there. And this is really for the benefit of other library representatives that are perhaps in this webinar, is that they wanted to know what kind of materials, what kind of pedagogical materials that they can have purchased for their libraries. What should they have in there? Of course, there's some books now that mariachi is being written about. Jose's book hopefully will come out in the near future, but there's some, of course, in Spanish from Mexico, but there's also dissertations and theses there. One of the things that I thought, which was, I think, in remembering about, our experience, Ramon, with getting the program together, is just being able to have music, sheet music, and one of the things that José Hernandez brought or was able to give us are some music. And then with his arrangements, and then of course a lot of the mariachis like to do their own arrangements, but I think libraries could benefit really well, especially with the I think the growth of mariachi ensembles and programs in the universities. It's gone, just beyond just at the high school level and here in the Southwest, but even in California. And I imagine Ramon will be teaching at one of the universities there in New York sometime in the future. But in any case, my thought was just having access to music.
Yes,
and I wonder what else.
That's something that it's actually very different from the start of mariachi, music. That we have now a lot of written stuff, written things that are available. That before you used to either write it your own or learn it by ear, and now there are publishing companies who are doing a lot of mariachi music, and I think that's something that should be available to everybody. And also all these great books about mariachi history and mariachi education that also have helped us, that we're the newer program. I think that also has to be at hand, because it is a lot of help, especially for someone who's trying to create or to do a mariachi program. All these things and all this music and everything is available now. So it wasn't available before, so they should take advantage of it.
And as for pedagogical material, Mariachi Education Press is starting to come out with some good books. They have like trumpet method books 1, 2, and 3. Like it's more beginner, advanced, beginner, intermediate, advanced. They also just published Joe Baca, who plays with Mariachi Cobre now. He just published a set of 50 mariachi violin etudes that are also coming out. So Mariachi Education Press has a lot of stuff. There's also a book called Mariachi Mastery that's really good for more beginner level students. And I say Mariachi Education Press is a little newer, so I know that they're going to be coming out with like a lot more pedagogical stuff. I'm actually working on a project with them also that hopefully will be published next year. So I know that there's a lot going on there to look out for with Mariachi Education Press, like on as far as pedagogical material goes, because music, like he said, there's a lot of music you can find now. If anybody's interested, there's also a Dropbox folder with like several hundred mariachi songs that people will like write out or they'll type out, and it's like a folder big enough that you actually have to pay for Dropbox. But it's got so much music in there, and you can like ask people like if they have like a specific song or whatnot. So there's a lot more resources out now than I think there were even maybe 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, even Mariachi Vargas Publishing Company, they also do their own things, and even Mel Bay has a couple of methods in mariachi instrumentation. So there's a few things.
Yeah. Do you hear that, librarians out there? Kristen, I'm not sure, looks like we're towards the end, and I wish we had another hour. I'm telling you, these people are so knowledgeable, and there's so many, I didn't even get through half of what I was thinking about talking about. So you need a part 2 to this.
I agree. We definitely need to do this again. We did have a question come in at the end here, and we'll see if we can't address that through email. I do want to thank everyone so much for coming. This has been a real treat. Dr. Ragland, thank you so much for moderating our event today, and to all the panelists. Thank you so much. The hour flew by. I just want to,
It really did. I'm sorry, I meant to stop sooner, but it was just such good discussion. I just didn't want to interrupt.
yes, it's been fantastic. Yes, and we will be preparing a recording of this, and we can send that out to all of our registrants as soon as that is ready. And I just want to give notification of our first chair chat for the spring. We're in the early stages of planning that, and that's going to be a library focused one, but I think probably also interest to composers possibly as well, on how to circulate unique items. So items that we receive that might come with unique supplemental materials, such as items for prepared instrument, and the challenges that libraries might face with cataloging those, preserving them, and circulating them. So we're going to have a real fun kind of show and tell on some solutions that we've come up with for that, as well as to have a discussion on items where we might need some more input from the music library community. So I want to thank everyone once again for coming. It's been a real fun time. It's been a treat. And I wish you all a fantastic afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. This was wonderful. And it's so great to see you, Ramon. I was so happy to be able to bring you guys together. We should do it again.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.